Hey, church family, thank you so much for tuning in and joining us tonight for our Town Talk. I hope you've had a wonderful day so far. We just wrapped up our 5-week series on race and racial reconciliation, and tonight we're going to kind of go back to one of our old standby favorites and talk about COVID. Though actually it'll be kind of fun because Brian is interviewing Dr. Joe Salinas from our church to kind of talk about what's going on in the Tri-Cities, what's been happening, what kind of things can we expect, what new things have we learned, and kind of how are we going to be moving forward, which I'm really looking forward to. It's also something that's very relevant to our community at large, so I would really encourage you, click on the share button and just share it now. This is the kind of thing, whether people are part of our church or not, will be very relevant, helpful information. So please share it and feel free to comment and like and ask questions. Do keep in mind, because of schedules and all of that, we had to record this the end of last week. So this is not a live broadcast or interview right now, which means you can comment and ask questions, but we'll have to address them after the fact, not during the actual conversation tonight. Beyond that, stick around at the end. I'd love to fill you in on what we have coming next for the Town Talks, and I hope you enjoy and find this conversation helpful and meaningful. See you soon.
Hi everyone, want to welcome you. We've tried to have a running dialogue with Dr. Joe Salinas, local physician in our community and part of our church, and frankly he's my doctor as well, and wanted to keep up on the science. It's been a little while since we've had a conversation with Joe, and just wanted to get up to date regarding the latest in science, and particularly looking at our community and what is our experience with COVID-19 at this point, and what is it that we really need to know. And so, Joe, I guess I'm interested, first of all, what are your questions that you're receiving from your patients, and what are the things that we need to know as a community that we may not be up on?
Brian, I'm getting a lot of questions that are not specifically medical questions or science-related questions per se. What I'm getting is a lot of questions about the shutdown. When is it going to end, and should we be doing it, and how should they go about it? Which certainly scientists need to be in on the planning, but these are also societal and political decisions as well. So I can tell you what I tell my patients is there are no easy answers to societal questions. There are no easy answers to these multifaceted issues where either way there's going to be a downside. So you have to make these difficult choices. In healthcare, I think I've said this before when we've spoken, we do this all the time. We decide we're going to screen these people, but we're not going to screen these people because we only have so many resources and we can only screen so many people, which means you're going to miss some disease. Or we're going to treat up to this point, and after that point, it really is not beneficial to most people to treat. Some people it might be. So these are, it's certainly on people's mind. I understand it, but they're things that their congressmen need. They need to be talking to them about. They need to be talking to their community leaders about. And these decisions have to be made together. So there's also, as with any high-stress situation, there are always going to be a lot of speculation, and so things are getting thrown out into the media, and because this has become the central topic for everybody's internet searches and discussions around the dinner table, these ideas that come up are treated as though they are proven scientific fact. And I do remind people of what the process of science is: theory, experimentation, re-theorizing based on what results of your experiments show. And things that sound like really good ideas on pen and paper, in reality, often turn out to be incorrect. And by doing the experiment, you realize, okay, that didn't work, and then you start thinking a little more deeply. Well, why didn't it work? And it gives you the information to go back and try again. And so it's a process. So when you hear about things that sound originally or initially promising and then you don't hear about them again, it's not always because there's a conspiracy to suppress the information. It's because it didn't work. And, nobody wants things not to work. Yeah. Nobody's trying to suppress a cure for this disease. Trust me. Pharmaceutical companies would love to be the ones to come up with the cure for this disease, because that is the golden goose for them if they do. So, recognizing that patience is hard when people are getting sick and people are dying and you can't go to work and your kids can't go to school. That's hard. At the same time, rushing things in science and in medicine especially is often really, really bad, and leads to things like thalidomide that cause limb defects in children, or Laetrile, where people not getting proven cancer treatments because they're going down to Mexico and getting Laetrile. This was back in the 70s, and I'm old enough to remember that when I was a kid and people doing that. Yeah. So I know that the scientists are working as hard as they can. The healthcare professionals, and I'm talking about my peers, I'm not just talking about me, are working very, very hard to try to get people the information they need and get them the care that they need, while not subjecting them to becoming experiments. I don't experiment on my patients. I don't think that's good medicine. Well, I know it's not good medicine. So we don't do that. So that's kind of, those are the major things that I'm being asked about. I'm still being asked about, and I'm sure we're going to get to them. There are some buzzwords and going around, and people, when you talk about disease, you talk about how do you get it? What do you do when you get it? What are the risks when you get it? What do I have to know after I get it? Right? So we're still, in that regard, it's a fluid thing because we're getting better. We are getting better at treating it. So you're more likely to survive if you get it now, because the hospitals have seen a lot of it. And they have gotten a little better at figuring out some tweaks about COVID-related, say, adult respiratory distress syndrome. So when we treat patients with adult respiratory distress syndrome, one of the things that we tried years and years ago, decades ago, was steroids. Because in ARDS you have an immune system out of control, you've got an inflammatory response out of control. And so there were several studies looking at using steroids for ARDS that did not show a benefit. And in fact, a couple of them showed an increase in mortality. So we stopped doing that. With the ARDS associated with COVID, there were some studies that showed a benefit. So that has now become, with very strict criteria based on what was done in those studies, that has become now a typical therapy for people if they meet certain criteria, if they're very sick with COVID-19. So that's improved some of the mortality data, and the supportive measures have gotten better. We've gotten better at identifying, who's at risk and getting them into the care they need earlier. So we are getting better, but we've got a long way to go.
So let's run through, how do I get it? What do I do? I think particularly on the how do I get it, I've heard recently some information that's a little bit different than we heard before regarding how long it might stay on a surface. Is it how far it can transmit from like the droplets?
Droplets in it versus aerosol.
Yeah, so we're pretty social distanced here. We came in with masks. We're in my office. But can you tell us about what is our understanding at this point in time regarding its lifespan outside just in the environment, and how I might contract it and how I might protect myself and those around me?
So this is again. There's a professor I work with at the medical school where I teach, and the students, one year they actually printed out a T-shirt that said, "It depends," because that's his answer to everything. Every time you ask him a question, he goes, well, it depends, So when you talk about virology, you can study how long a viral particle can remain viable.
Okay.
And for COVID, I've seen numbers as high as days on surfaces. But does that mean it still retains its ability to infect? So it hasn't broken down, the capsule is still intact, but can it still cause an infection? And how easy is it to pick that up, right? So
it's interesting that that's two different things.
Right.
Yeah.
And that's just two.
Yeah.
So there's lots of others as to what leads to somebody depositing the virus and somebody then contracting the virus, and so studying when is it viable, and then if it's viable, does it retain the ability to attach to a cell and to inject its genetic material into the cell? That requires more work to figure those things out, and that's again, it's ongoing, and the science is fluid right now. Typically, in infectious disease, what we say is assume the worst. And hope for the best. And so wash your hands, socially distance, not because it's 100% and not because God tapped me on the side of the head and said, this is what you do, but because we're trying to minimize our contact. Look, when HIV first came out, was first identified back in the 80s, prior to HIV, we didn't wear gloves when we drew blood.
Yeah, that's right.
And I remember my college roommate just devastated when he came home from seeing the doctor because he was convinced he had AIDS because the nurse put gloves on when she drew his blood.
Wow.
And because he wasn't familiar with universal precautions when we first started doing universal precautions. So a lot of the stuff we did regarding HIV didn't really decrease our risk of infection of HIV once we learned how HIV is passed. But you start off being extremely guarded and being extremely careful. And then as you get to understand things more and more, then you realize, okay, we don't necessarily have to do this, right? We don't have to heat everything up to this temperature. We don't have to throw away, the scope after we scope somebody. There is a way to clean it to make sure that it's free of disease.
Wow.
So right now, we're still as long and drawn out as this feels to people. And believe me, I understand, and I'm experiencing it myself. It's still early days, in our gaining knowledge about this. You got millions of people working on this, and so the information's coming in, but we don't have hard and fast answers, and that's why right now it's still, let's be as careful as we reasonably can be. The difficulty comes in whose definition of reasonable.
Sure. Wow. So, coming back, regarding how do I contract it, what precautions do we need to be taking? Has there been any real change in the conversation from last time, where we were talking a lot about social distancing, we were talking a lot about masks, utilizing hand sanitizer, those types of things. I think a lot of businesses are rotating their staff, so we don't have as many people in a building at one time. And we've been doing the same thing. Most of us come in 2-3 times a week, but some of us are here more than that. We have kept the building closed just because of custodial, trying to maintain, particularly sanitizing whenever anybody comes in, and not overrunning our staff on that. But has anything changed that we should know about?
From the last time we spoke, I don't know that much has changed. I would like to point something out, and I don't want to get into a political discussion. I know you don't either.
Yeah.
And I do not discuss politics with my patients in the exam room. They may come up, but I just don't take part. But what you should know about medicine and science is that a good scientist, a good physician, by the way, there shouldn't be a distinction between a good scientist and a good physician.
Amen.
Is willing to change their mind. Mm-hmm. We do not adhere to dogma. So early on, you were told by the World Health Organization and by the CDC, masks don't make a difference. In a community where even in a community where the incidence is high, and this was based on data that was coming out of China, and we can say what we want about the data out of China, but it's what they had to work with. Sure. And working off of that, they said it does not appear as though wearing a mask in the general population affects the infection rates. Once we saw European data, and we tracked back on the infection in the United States and saw that the way the infection spread in the United States, there was convincing evidence that, yes, indeed, actually masks do help. Mm-hmm. And you saw the scientists come out and basically do a mea culpa and say, you know what, we were wrong about that, you should wear masks. Now, there were other reasons for the World Health Organization decision. There were at that time there was a shortage of masks, mm-hmm. and they wanted to make sure the healthcare professionals, if you get your gallbladder out because it exploded, you want your surgeon to have a mask, right? So there were other things that were influencing that recommendation. Also, one of the things I instruct my patients about is when the CDC makes a recommendation, because I've heard that some people are telling me they don't trust the CDC. You don't have to trust the CDC. The CDC tells you how they came about their recommendation. They publish it with the recommendation. They publish the articles. They reference the articles, and you can go and read the articles. And they grade their recommendations. They tell you this has got strong evidence based on placebo-controlled double-blinded studies, or they say, this has got weak evidence because it's only based on observational data. So this attitude that the CDC is somehow some Kafkaesque entity that sends down these edicts from on high and won't be questioned. I don't understand that, because the CDC is, I saw a clip on the internet in which an individual stated, when you get sick, you don't call Dr. Fauci, you call your own doctor. And I thought to myself, and guess who your own doctor calls? They go to the CDC. If they're a decent doctor, they look at what the CDC says, because they've compiled all the data for you, and then you read the data. And the World Health Organization and the FDA, none of these, you make up your own mind. When you're a physician, you can read these things and you make up your own mind, and I do. But these are institutions that were developed in order to support evidence-based medicine. because we learned in the 30s and the 40s and the 50s and the 60s that anecdotal medicine is bad medicine. It kills people. So just because you think it's a good idea, and in your study on 12 people, your patients, or 300 of your patients, you think, without actually doing any statistical analysis of it, that it works. Turns out that's typically not good. And we hurt a lot of people, in the 19th century. And it wasn't until the 80s that we decided, no, actually, we should be more scientific about this and stop experimenting on our patients. Yeah. So the masks, they work. They're not a cure, but they help. Hand washing definitely helps. If you can't wash, then the antiseptic gels are good. We would always rather people wash their hands for 20 seconds. That's better. But if you can't, use the hand sanitizer. Carry it with you. I've got a bottle in my bag. Got a bottle in my car. Yeah, me too. And whenever you leave someplace, get that hand sanitizer on as soon as you can. Social distancing, works. We are looking at other stuff. There's a lot of things being looked at, and it takes time. And so, unfortunately, it takes people getting sick and not getting sick, and looking at how many did and didn't, to see what works and what doesn't, and things that look initially promising. I'm used to it. I've been doing this for 25 years now, and I'm used to things that sounded great, and the initial data looked really good, and we were very excited about it, and then it just fell flat on its face. So, I could list them off. I could take the hour just listing off things that sounded really good, that I was very excited about as a young physician, only to find, when the data was all in, well, we tried. Just look at Alzheimer's. How long have we been working on Alzheimer's? Yeah. And we are just still completely lost in the woods with Alzheimer's, trying to find even trying to understand what's going on, let alone trying to find an effective treatment.
Well, I've known several people who've had it, and they've felt like they're over it, but they'll still, like, sense of taste and smell, those just kind of go away. I mean, what is the...
Yeah, that's not an uncommon thing for upper respiratory infections. A lot of people, did you hear COVID can do this? Yeah, I mean, upper respiratory infections can certainly do that. And, they get in through typically they get in through the olfactory system. And so the olfactory nerves right there goes right in to the brain. Yeah. You can affect that nerve, and you can wind up with a loss of taste of sense or smell, or smell or taste, rather. 70% of taste is smell anyhow, right? I think it'll come back for most people. I have had people get ill from other diseases and never get their sense of taste back, and you can see it with other things. Wow. It's an early manifestation of Parkinson's disease. So, if somebody's not sick and they just say, hey, by the way, I lost my sense of smell, one of the things you start to ask questions about Parkinson's disease in their family and whatnot. Unfortunately, it's not like there's much we can do to stop that from happening, but it's a little, it could be a warning sign that in a couple of years this person may show signs of Parkinsonism. So there are, we're aware of this as a manifestation of certain disease processes. We haven't got years of experience with corona right now, with this novel coronavirus, so we don't know. Most upper respiratory infections, unless they leave behind scarring, pneumonia can cause scarring in the lungs, we call bronchiectasis, and that leaves behind, you wind up with problems the rest of your life. And a lot of people have known somebody who, when they were young, had a severe pneumonia, and their lungs are just never the same after that, right? So you can get damage to the respiratory system that can be long-lasting. I think the older you are, the more pre-existing diseases you have, pre-existing illnesses you have, the more likely you are to have sequelae not only to have an increased risk of mortality, but to have long-term sequelae from the infection as well, like anything else.
Yeah. Wow. Okay. So I felt like I, may have had something. I called my physician, had a test, and I test positive. What do I expect regarding medication? Well,
the major treatment is supportive.
Okay.
So we don't have any COVID-specific treatment.
Okay.
Especially on the outpatient basis, right? So,
what's going to determine if I'm an outpatient or just severity?
Severity of disease.
Okay.
So there's mild, moderate, severe, right? And and again, if you go to this site, you can, to the Washington State site, you'll see exactly how that is arrived at. And this was by consensus of the experts, and based on what we're seeing. Who gets sicker, who dies, who gets better, and then using that information to inform how we triage care.
Okay.
So, fever not necessarily severe disease. Hypoxia definitely, low oxygen, radiographic evidence of pneumonia, shortness of breath, if you're over 65 and you feel weak, you feel just very ill, that's good enough to go in the emergency room and let them do the assessment.
Okay.
If you check your oxygen and it's 97%, but you feel very weak, and you're not sure you're able to take adequate nourishment, you should still go get checked out.
Okay.
And then, there are some COVID-specific treatments in the hospital that, again, are very specific to what's your oxygen doing, do you need oxygen? And we've tweaked it to, do you need low-flow oxygen or do you need high-flow oxygen? And we've differentiated what you get. So remdesivir, the antiviral drug, is being used typically for specific patients. Depending on oxygen needs, steroids are being used. We're running out of the steroids that were studied, and so now they're starting to use different steroids. And the question is that going to be as effective as the other steroid? Because they don't all work on the same inflammatory processes. Interleukin-6, specifically being one of the ones that we're worried about with SARS-related ARDS. So we're running into shortages because we're treating a lot of people. But at home, it's typically supportive measures and self-quarantine, right? So try to set up a space for yourself where you're not exposing other family members, your own bathroom, not just your own bedroom, but your own bathroom, your own utensils in the kitchen. Best if somebody's making meals, just leaving it, and then, you can come out and clean your stuff, and you use that same stuff, those same utensils, things like that, for 2 weeks.
So in the hospital, I think something that would be helpful for us regarding the patient, what does the patient expect? Someone is severe enough to be in hospitalized. Family, friends, how do I interact? Who do I see? What is because I've heard, and there again, I have not been in a hospital, which is weird because a lot of my job has been in the hospital, and since this started. But, I don't get to see even the face of the person who's taking care. I've heard, there have been instances where they've enlarged photographs, the nurses and the caretakers, and put them on their PPE. Tell us about what the experience is from the patient's perspective.
I just had somebody discharged 2 days ago. She was pretty sick. And she hated her hospitalization. And nobody's really thrilled being in the hospital, but nobody, almost nobody came to see me. Of the healthcare workers. I mean, right now there are no family, as you said, no family, no friends in the hospital. I am not the treating physician in the hospital. They don't want me in the hospital, even though I'm this person's primary care doctor. And it's understandable because every single time that a healthcare worker goes to see a patient, they have to fully garb in fresh personal protective equipment. So you go to see a patient, a nurse goes to see a patient to help her go to the bathroom. She dons all the PPE. She goes in, she helps her go to the bathroom, she helps her get back to bed. She comes out, she throws that all away. Then she goes to see the next patient who needs help, having something to eat because can't eat themselves or needs their IV turned off. Dons new personal protective equipment, goes in, changes the IV, comes back out, throws that all away. And so you can see their resources are being strained. They're going through a lot of personal protective equipment, and it is really what a task that would have taken 10 minutes takes a half an hour. And so the staff is being stretched to the limit on what they're able to do because all these measures are in place. The number of people, and if, God forbid, one of the staff comes up positive, they've now lost that person. So, these people, when they go home, they're very limited. I'm talking about the healthcare workers in exposing themselves to other people. So imagine the stress that these healthcare workers are under, the hospital workers are under. It's tremendous. And they're not being able to interact with their family and friends as well. I've got a friend who's a nurse at a local hospital, and she just quarantines basically. She's self-quarantined for months and months and months, and so her quality of life is really poor, and so for the patients, that the only time they're seeing a healthcare worker, they're coming in, they've got all this protective equipment on, they're overworked, they're stressed out. It's not a great situation. Thank God for. I never thought I'd hear myself say this, but thank God for social media.
Yeah.
For at least for devices, right, that allow people to FaceTime with each other and Skype, and in fact, a lot of my visits we've now done FaceTime, and we've been given the opportunity by Medicare and by the insurers to treat these as regular visits, which people love, and they don't have to worry about, am I going to get exposed when I go to the doctor? So when they're coming for chronic condition management, something that's not related to COVID, they're still getting their care, right? Because a statistic that has been talked about again and again and again, during a pandemic, death due to non-infectious causes goes up. Yeah. Because people don't go to the hospital and they don't go to the doctor because they're afraid they're going to get infected. And so their diabetes goes unmanaged and their blood pressure goes unmanaged. And I'm seeing it. I'm seeing it in my office. And I pride myself on really helping my diabetic patients, energizing them and empowering them to take hold of their disease and to take and to manage it. And I've had some diabetics come in that just took off. And that patient I was talking about that we were trying to, I had a patient who was very sick. His diabetes was completely out of control. He went from being well controlled with an average blood sugar of 140 to in 2 months, 2.5 months, his average blood sugar was 550, and he had his blood had become acidic, and he had ketones in his blood, which is a very bad sign for a diabetic patient. And I sent him to the emergency room. I said, we got to get this down quickly. You lose a lot of fluid when you're that high, and he had been running that high for months. He told me, so we had to get a lot of fluid into him. It's a complicated thing to manage. We had to start him on insulin so you could send his blood sugar too low. And the hospitalist refused the admission because when they tested him in the hospital, yes, his blood was acidic. Yes, his blood sugar was 600, but he didn't have ketones. So they said, well, he could be managed as an outpatient. And while I would typically have gotten on the phone and dressed that hospitalist down, instead I coordinated with the emergency room doctor because I understand what's going on over there. I understand how stressed they are. And I said, I'll do it. I'll do it. I'll take care of him as an outpatient, and I've been managing him as an outpatient. So I'm doing things, that I typically would not be comfortable doing because the hospital just is not available as a resource for all those people. So, having the ability to do these televisits and it's very important for people in the hospital to stay connected. Yes, socially isolate, but don't socially disconnect.
Yes.
So physically isolate, but you stay connected to your family, because these are people are not, a lot of people not responding well to this. Some people are thriving. Some people who are going out and hiking and running and taking advantage of this time and reorganizing the way that they're working, and they've actually decided they're going to continue to work from home. But for a lot of people, this is an extremely stressful time. And don't forget, there are still people that you can connect with even if you can't physically be with them.
Absolutely. Yeah, I had a friend commit suicide in the middle of the night last night. Yeah.
Oh my God, I'm so sorry.
Yeah. How, I think, looking at our community, help us understand hospital bed space. Because there's a different thing, as I understand. Some, I've looked at different statistics regarding the nation, regarding ours. There was a point we were looking at pretty high capacity, but it's not just the bed space. It's the hospital staffing is
right.
Almost the more important urgency.
Yeah. So I mean, this issue with the with this diabetic patient and the hospitalists refusing the admission, that happened yesterday. The only metric that we are meeting in the Tri-Cities right now for reopening is hospital bed space. So the metric is you have to have less than 80% full,
okay,
being used, and we're there. We're okay on that. But you have to have nurses and nurses' aides to take care of the people in those beds. So we've got the beds, but I don't think we have, and hospitalists, doctors to care for them. I don't think we have the staff. And I'm not speaking for the hospitals. So I don't work for any of the hospitals in the Tri-Cities. I am not privy to the staffing data of the hospitals in the city. I'm just working off of what I've experienced as a local area physician and compared to what I've experienced in the last 20 years working here and working with the hospitals here.
Well, and you had been a hospitalist at one point in your career.
Yeah, I was a hospitalist back in LA.
You understand how it works.
Yeah, I started. I started a hospitalist group back in LA, back before people even knew what a hospitalist was. In fact, when I went to my chief of medicine, we weren't even called hospitalists then. We were called inpatient physicians. And when I went to the chief of medicine, at Kaiser Permanente and pitched this idea, she had never heard of it before, and so this was back in 1995. So yeah, I'm I know how it's done. It's a different skill set, and they do these shifts, and a lot of times when I talk to students, they think it's great because you do 7 days on and 7 days off. Yeah, you're doing 12-hour shifts, and but 12-hour shifts. You're not done in 12 hours, right? You've still got to sign out, tuck in everything that you've got outstanding. So now you're talking about 14 hours, right? And you do 14 hours in a row. It takes 3 days to recuperate from that. Absolutely. And so you get 7 days off, but 3 days is just recuperation. And then you get 1 or 2 days to enjoy, and then you're thinking, oh God, I got to do this again. And so you don't want to go anywhere that 1 or 2 days before, right? So, the hospitalists that are dealing with this, they're doing long shifts, and everybody's being stretched to the minimums, to the maximum. So, yeah, we've got the bed space. I don't know that we've got the staffing. ICU, typically in the Tri-Cities, we have ICU care, but we don't have large capacity ICU care. We don't have a ton of ventilators in the Tri-Cities, so we have not gotten to a point where we're dangerously stretched, thank God, and I don't see it happening. I think, we have pretty good resources in this town, but I can tell you, right, even now, the hospitals, even though the beds are there, they're not. I tried to admit somebody last week, and we had to hold on to that patient in my office for 3 or 4 hours until somebody got discharged from the hospital because they didn't have a bed. They had beds, but you can't say you have a bed for this patient until you have a nurse to staff that bed.
Sure.
So we had to wait for somebody to get their discharge processed before my patient could be admitted. So we are actually we're near capacity.
And what would we normally expect in an August versus right now?
Now, August is a fairly slow month, and again, I don't work for the hospital, and I haven't been a hospitalist in years. But August is, in the Tri-Cities, typically, as far as hospitalization goes, a fairly slow month. A lot of people are on vacation. We are a spot that people come to enjoy the rivers, and so you'll see an upswing in water-related injuries and recreation-related injuries, in the hospitals, trauma, things like that, this time of year. But typically, the medical beds are usually not near capacity, nowhere near capacity this time of year. So
when do they normally have a spike?
September, October, late September, early October, as the cold and flu season starts to come in, which is just around the corner.
Yeah, that was where I was going.
Yeah.
So projecting out, and nobody has a crystal ball, but early they had talked about a second wave, and that we would kind of die down in summer, and then we would expect there would be a spike in the fall. And then they said, well, we didn't really go down, and so we probably won't even experience that. But what is your thoughts regarding the fall? And I think, interested, obviously parents, schools and all of that, when we start thinking about the fall, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, so since right now the schools don't even know what the schools are going to do.
Yeah. We've been dealing with what we're going to do with our preschool a lot.
So it's hard to know what's going to happen because we don't even know. The schools are basically having to come up with at least 2 curricula. One in the school, and they're talking about maybe not moving the students. Having these cohorts of students who stay together all day, and then moving the teachers, right? They're trying to come up with all kinds of ideas for in-person instruction, and they have to have online options for people who don't feel comfortable sending their kids to school. Or in case the numbers go up to such an extent that the government, the governing bodies say can't do it, got to close the schools again. So they've got to have that already in place. So they're scrambling. So it's hard to know. I can tell you this, cold and flu season comes around every year. And so that's going to happen again this year. So we're going to have that on top of COVID. We're going to have cold and flu season, and the flu shots are just about ready to come out. So, I checked on them, and I last time I checked was last week, and I didn't see that they were out yet. But I do see that the orders are showing up on my electronic health record, so it's about time, they're about to come out. So you're going to see the typical rise in hospitalizations and deaths due to the, just the typical cold and flu season. We saw what happened when states opened early or refused to close. And again, you can argue about the socioeconomic aspects of that decision, but if you're talking about numbers of cases and numbers of deaths, they went up. And so, if the school's open, I heard that in children, this is oftentimes not a severe disease. A lot of children are asymptomatic. The mortality in children is, the best guess is about 0.08%, which is a very low mortality. But again, if you expose tens of millions of people, even a low mortality, you're going to get some deaths. And how many dead children is too many dead children? So because you say that, because I mean, look, I remember quoting a number to women, and we used to say, with hormone replacement therapy, it's 11 extra breast cancers per 10,000 women treated, which on the face of it doesn't sound like a big number. And at least half the time when I say that, the woman will answer me, unless you're one of those 11. Yeah. So, it's 0.08%, which is not a very big number and doesn't matter to the person whose child died. But is that worth shutting down the schools of the entire country? I don't know. That's a social decision. That's a political decision, right? I know this: if you open the schools and the kids go to school, they're going to see more infections, and those kids are going to bring those infections home to their parents and to their grandparents, and the grandparents you're going to continue to see high mortality in. So I'm not making. I don't think I'm going out on a limb saying that. I mean, if you increase the number of people who are infected, grandma and grandpa are more likely to get infected. They're more likely to come into contact with somebody, who's been in contact with one of these kids. Even if the kids didn't get sick per se, they're infected, and they can act as vectors. So I think the mortality will remain high, or will remain. The death rate in those above 65 will remain where it's at. If the schools open, it's going to be that much harder to bring that down. Not impossible. Maybe, we'll talk probably in a short period of time about a vaccine. So there's always hope. And as I've said, we're working hard. A lot of people, a lot of very smart people are working very hard to try to come up with something to affect these numbers and to flatten this curve without these draconian measures that have been put into place, and that's a very difficult thing to predict.
Oh, absolutely.
So now that you asked me to predict the unpredictable about what's going to happen with the infection rates. Now you're going to ask me to predict what's going to happen with the vaccine.
Sure. Well, before we get to that, I do have a question, but I want to come back to the vaccine. And without, I'm not saying this from a political agenda. However, I've had quite a few people point to Canada, to Sweden, to Switzerland, and they're able to go back to school and very low rates and all of that. Is that apples to apples? Is that apples to oranges? Is it apples to humpback whales? I mean, how do we correlate, and why Canada's not very far away?
Yeah.
How come they can go back to normal?
Yeah. So there's a reason that epidemiology is its own science, because very few things are apples to apples. And when you start looking at numbers, at statistical analysis, you have to really dive down into the specifics of where do these numbers come from, and what behavior patterns are we looking at, and what's being measured, and in what population, and what type of exposure, and what's their lifestyle like. And so I've read several articles regarding these differential numbers, and it's everything from how do they collect the numbers and how many tests are they actually doing, to how do people live on a day-to-day basis. Americans, one of the things that this country prides itself on is individuality. And, Americans are very much all about our individual freedoms, and we don't like being told what to do. And a lot of countries, they're used to being told what to do, and they're used to following orders. You stand in line in the United States, and you're going to have a lot of upset people.
Oh, yeah.
Stand in line in China. That's what we do. Russia. You stand in line. That's what you do. You go stand in line all day, So there's a lot of social norms that affect these numbers that make, that will make some interventions much more effective in that place than it is in another place. And so, you can have this. I'm not saying don't have the discussion, but if you're going to have the discussion, it's not going to be a bumper sticker discussion. It's not going to be, well, this is this and that's that. Therefore, no, it's not that simple. I'm sorry. Life is not that simple. There are a lot of different variables. There are a lot of reasons for the differential numbers. And the numbers are not as different as a lot of people think when you actually start to look at all of these other considerations.
Okay.
Right? So, and again, epidemiologists are looking at that to try to figure out, is there something we can learn from Canada? Is there something, we can learn from Switzerland, and does it really work, in Denmark as well as they're saying it works?
Yeah.
And, Germans are good at following orders. They do what they're told. And so the Germans are really good about, well, don't do that. Okay, I won't do that, and their infection rate stayed low. It's more than one or two things. It's a complicated discussion. It's an interesting discussion, and I think we could learn some things, and hopefully maybe not. Maybe we can say, look, when we first started treating breast cancer, it was awful what we did to women when we were treating breast cancer.
Yes.
These radical mastectomies that we would do on women, we'd take muscle away and all the lymph nodes and just disfigure these poor people. And then somebody actually decided to do a study rather than, I think it's best, just slash and burn. That's the best, right? Well, let's actually do a study and see if this is, can we get away with taking just the tissue around there and maybe hitting her with some radiation? Is she just as likely to survive? And it turns out, we didn't need to be doing that to people. And so we may find, that all of these measures that were put into place some of them weren't necessary. And I'd be the first, to breathe a sigh of relief if we didn't have to do these things. So, but you start with as careful as you can be. Try not to do any harm, and so that's why we don't jump to just doing these harmful things to people. And learn from the science as you go. So I'm hoping, if we can learn something from these other countries, and maybe we can back off a little on these things. But you got to give people the time to actually look at it and make sure that we're not jumping the gun, because we did that too. With carotid endarterectomies, when we first started doing ultrasounds on carotids, we saw plaque. You got plaque in there, we got to get rid of that plaque. And they started doing all these surgeries and reaming out these carotid arteries and causing strokes. And then again, somebody did a study and said, you know what, if we just leave these people alone, they're less likely to have a stroke, even with the plaque there, than if we do the study. So then they didn't do them at all. Well, and then it turned out, if they have 80% plaque, it's actually better to get that out of there than leaving them. Then they're more likely to have a stroke. So we had to tweak it, right? The pendulum swung one way. We're going to do it, all of them. Pendulum swung the other way. We're not going to do any of them. And then came reason, right? Let's look at all the data. If they meet these criteria, we'll do it. If they don't, it's not worth doing it, and we'll watch them, right? But that took time. That took 15 years for that science to emerge. So hopefully it won't take that long for this, but it's a work in progress.
So we get into the fall, we may see a spike. We get closer to winter, and it sounds like the projections are we might have a vaccine somewhere around the beginning of the year. What's your thought? Where are we on that? I do understand we're investing in potential cures, even though we don't know where they are. We're just going to invest in case one of these is the silver bullet. Then we'll have plenty that's already mass produced, so we can just bring out.
Yeah, they're putting in the logistics for distribution.
Yes. Yeah.
The main concern with that is, are you going to interfere? Are you going to wind up maintaining resources that aren't being used that could be used for influenza? And are you going to interfere with influenza vaccination? So they're trying to, not upset the apple cart there.
Sure.
The thing about vaccine, so there was a drug that was Actually, there was a biological treatment that was being looked at years ago that was going to raise good cholesterol, HDL. It's called tercetrapib. And, HDL, good cholesterol, so-called good cholesterol, right? And the higher the HDL, the lower the risk of heart disease. We'll just say that that's true, okay? And it is, for the most part. It is, again, science is complicated.
Sure.
But, good cholesterol, right? More good cholesterol means lower risk of heart disease, right? Awesome. And so this drug did great. In the first 9 studies with this drug, it did great. And even in the early human studies, looked good. And then all of a sudden, it hit a wall. And when they did phase 2 studies on this drug, they saw more people were having strokes taking the drug than that were taking the placebo. And that drug died on the vine.
Okay.
And so it was 2 studies away from FDA approval, and it died on the vine.
Wow.
And so what Dr. Fossey said was, if all the planets align, if every single guess that we make turns out to be the right guess, and we happen to hit the right one the first time, we throw that dart, and every single time we hit the bullseye, theoretically it's conceivable by the end of the year we could have a vaccine. I don't see how it happens by the end of the year. I frankly don't see how we get a vaccine by the end of the year. I don't think it's possible. Love to be wrong.
Yeah.
It's one of the things I'd love to be wrong about.
So we get one. That doesn't mean 100% across the board just going to wipe it away. I mean, there's a...
any vaccine, there's going to be a non-reaction. There's a percentage of people who are non-reactors, right? And that's one of the reasons that it takes so long to get a vaccine to market, because you've got to test to see, do we have to boost it, right? So some vaccines that you get, like hepatitis, when you get the hepatitis B vaccine, it's 3 vaccines, right? We've got to boost you, because if you just give one, only about 70% of people are going to respond to that. If you give 2, it goes up to about 87%. If you give 3, you're up to 98%, right? The new shingles vaccine, it's 2 shots. You get the second shot 2 to 6 months after the first shot, right? So some vaccines you need a booster to make sure, and it's not so much, well, if I give it to you, you'll get an 80% response. If I give you a second one, you'll get a 98%. No, it's 80% of people will respond, 20% won't. They won't get immune. So you've got to boost them, right? And the only way to know is to test.
Yeah.
Right? And you got to test a lot of people. Does it make antibody? Okay, yes, it makes antibody. Does that antibody actually turn out to be protective? You can make antibody, So I got this weapon that it works against every soldier. Every soldier that comes into contact with this weapon, it shaves their hair off. They can still kill you. And so you can make antibody. If it just shaves the hair off of the coronavirus, it's not going to help.
Good analogy.
So, so it's when people say there's an antibody response, okay. Does it impart immunity, right? So this is a multi-step process, and at any point, we could be disappointed. We could see it, that didn't work. Or we got to give a booster. And so, that, and then you have to get it out to 300 million people, and somebody has to give it to them, right? So I don't, we'll see. Yeah. I mean, I don't like to be a naysayer. I like to be a positive person, and I hope for the best. And sometimes we get lucky, and I'm hoping we get lucky on this one.
What did we miss? Is there something that, so I think our time's probably about wrapping up here. Anything that we need to get in?
Hindsight's 20/20. I'm not a big fan of woulda, coulda, and shoulda.
Yeah.
Looking back, we should have acted sooner. We could have acted sooner.
regarding PPE and stocking up and what else?
Yeah, and
That's
quarantining, the social isolation stuff. But I mean, this is an unprecedented thing, and so for the governor to say right out of the gate, shut it all down, that's an unprecedented thing, and so I'm not saying I would have done any different. I don't know how I would have acted, but I mean, looking back. If China didn't have the recurring habit of suppressing information and blaming local officials, so that local officials suppress information because they don't want to be blamed from the central government, then that would, they would have shared information more quickly, and we would have gotten better information out of China. If we had we were getting information out of China. We had other sources of information. If we had paid attention to that information and we had acted sooner, this wouldn't have been as bad. If people stopped making everything political, wearing masks shouldn't be a political decision. It's like saying washing your hands is a political decision. Don't make this political. This is a medical decision. And it may be overkill. So look, we're trained to minimize risk in medicine. That's our job. To minimize the risk that the people we care for face as much as we can. So had we been better about that, had the population been better about actually following the recommendations of the healthcare professionals, we'd be in better shape right now. Had states not reopened, decided to ignore the numbers and reopened, they'd be in better shape right now. I'm answering the question medically. Socioeconomically, I feel it just as much as you do. And I understand that, there is a point where you go to war and you understand there's going to be casualties. But we've made the decision that this is important enough. And we may make the decision where we're going to reopen the economy. There's going to be casualties. But that's what politicians are paid for, to make. It would be nice, actually, for a politician to do what they're paid for once in a while. So they're paid to make these tough decisions. So they're going to make those tough decisions.
Well, Joe, I appreciate your time so much. This has been really interesting for me, and I hope everyone who's listening or watching online, I hope you all got your questions answered. If you have any questions, you can certainly contact us, and we do need to do better. We had so many things, and I know you did too, in the last, it's probably been about 2 months. It seems like COVID time.
I haven't seen you. I haven't seen you since the last time we talked.
I know. COVID time just, takes so much longer. I don't know. Something may have happened a week ago and it seems like 6 months ago, but it may have been 6 months ago and it seems like a week ago.
Oh, sure. I'll these patients I talk about, I'll say that to my nurse, that patient, from Monday, and she'll say that was this morning.
Yeah.
Really?
Oh, yeah,
that was this morning? It feels like a week ago.
It's crazy. I know. Yeah, it's good to see you. I miss spending time with you.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah.
Me too, brother. Miss spending time here.
Geez, we had all thought we'd be in phase 2 by now. I mean, that was we just decided looking at, and that's what I talked with Reggie McNeil for quite some time yesterday, and he said across the board, churches that have gone back, they've had about 16 to 20% of what they expected to come back. People just have not wanted to, and the amount of resources that takes has just been such a drain, and it's a hard thing. Really
well, we're all in this together.
And we're gonna get through it. But
we've been through tough times before. And we're living history. we kind of forget that. I think we got a little complacent, especially in the early 2000s, where we thought everything's just fine. We're living history, and these are crazy, fascinating, awful, wonderful times to be living in and living through, and we'll have stories to tell our grandkids.
Absolutely. Well, and honestly, what a time to be a physician, and what a time for me to be a church leader, and for us as a church. I really think the churches at large C Church will hopefully get closer to its initial mission than kind of what it's over the this is a longer podcast, but over the last 100, 200 years, I think we've kind of lost our perspective, and
Yeah, I think that's what I meant. Is I think a lot of people are kind of looking at their lives and looking at their is this the way I've been spending my days? This is really shaking a lot of people up, and a lot of people, the ways I've been. Do I really want to spend my days? Do I want to go back to that? And it's a weird kind of an opportunity.
It is
to look at your life. One of the most dreadful opportunities people have is when they receive a terminal diagnosis, and I'm there when I have that talk with them, and they're reminded of something that really a lot of us need to be reminded of, which is you're gonna die.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely.
Nobody here gets out alive.
That's right.
And I think this has shaken a lot of people and gotten them to kind of think about these things and think about am I really living my life the way I want to live my life? Am I meeting the goals that I espouse as being important to me? And I remember, when I was a young physician, when I first came into medicine, as I said, HIV was just exploding as I came, and it was a scary. I don't know if people remember. It was a really scary time.
Absolutely, yeah. Yes.
And especially to be in medicine, because we didn't know how you got it, and we were scared. Yeah. I'll tell you, I was a young guy and I was afraid, but we donned the stuff and we went in every day and we did what we took an oath to do. And the nation went through some really difficult throes in that time. There were some ugly things said and done. About there was some hateful things directed at those people who were suffering. Families were torn apart. There was a lot of politics. So we've kind of I remember those days, and that was people were wondering. People were talking about the end of days and God's wrath, and I still remember all that. And here we are again, So kind of remind people of that, that this is the human condition. This is, and that's why we need to be kind to each other, and we need to try to listen to each other, because it's after this it's going to be SARS 25, and there's going to be something else, and in the meantime, half of a city blows up in Beirut. Horrible. So this is just another reminder, and I've taken stock, and and we're looking at the way we practice, and can I alter that based on what we're learning from this? Let's try to get something. As you are so erudite at pointing out. God takes these horrible things and he bends them into good. And so there is good that can come out of this, and you're one of the people who has reminded me of that when I needed to hear that. So
outstanding. Well, I appreciate you so much as a doctor, as a friend, and
love
thank
you, brother.
For your time. Love you too, Joe. Thank you. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much, Pastor Brian and Dr. Joe. that we really appreciate the update and the information, the conversation you guys were having. And thank you so much to all of you out there who joined in, who shared, who posted any comments or likes. It definitely helps us get the word out to our community about this very, very relevant and still rapidly moving target. So thank you for tuning in. Now, I did promise at the beginning of this that I would let you know what's coming up for these Wednesday night Town Talks. And starting next week, our chairman of the board at our church, Corey Hatcher, who is also just a generally all-around good guy, is going to do Hillspring Staff Unplugged interviews. And basically what he's going to do is he's going to grab a handful of our staff over the next few weeks at least and just kind of interview us. And not about what we think theologically or what kind of work we do, but in more of a who are you, what makes you tick, and how did you end up here kind of a way. The hope is, while many of you we've had a chance to hang out with and get to know personally, there's also many of you we haven't. And so the hope is that we get a chance to kind of let our hair down, show you who we are, and help you, get to know us a bit. It should be a lot of fun, should be really interesting, and of course you will be very welcome to either send in questions ahead of time or live comment and ask questions during, and we will love to answer those as long as they're nice. But anyway, all that said, we're very much looking forward to it. Thank you so much for tuning in tonight. I hope you have a great rest of your evening or day wherever you're watching this, and between now and then, God bless, and we'll see you around. Thanks so much.